Thank you for joining today. We will be starting momentarily. We have 2 poll questions for you to complete while we wait for everyone to join. The first question on the screen is, what's your industry and role / role? We have 15% who are from the retirement provider industry, 21% from fintech, 13% from banks and credit unions, a hefty 50% from other. So that's great. We have a good mix of participants. So a second question is, are you currently offering an emergency savings solution to your employees? Yes, if you're currently offering, no, but it's on the roadmap, no, but considering it, no plans at this time. Great. So the poll results are in. We have about a quarter of folks who are currently offering, 12% who are not, but it's on the roadmap. About a third are considering it, and a third who don't any plans at this time. Well, that's great. Thanks to everyone for participating in those polls. Thought we'd go ahead and get started. So let's begin. My name is Nick Maynard. I'm a Senior Vice President at Commonwealth, and I will be your moderator for today. Thanks again to all those who are joining us today for this webinar entitled How Record Keepers Can Address Emergency Savings. This webinar is hosted by Commonwealth in partnership with BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative. The BlackRock ESI is a cross-sector program with a mission to help people living on low to moderate incomes gain access to and increase usage of proven strategies and tools for savings, ultimately helping them establish an important safety net. Commonwealth is a leading national nonprofit that builds solutions to make people financially secure and to make wealth more common for all, and we are a proud partner in BlackRock's ESI. Today's webinar focuses on the role that record keepers can play in addressing the emergency savings needs of Americans. This has been a much discussed topic for many years. There's lots of data that's mentioned, most common, the Federal Reserve data, about 40% of Americans not having $400 for an emergency. And it's one of the many, the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare this particular need for a financial cushion that one can tap and rebuild and then tap and rebuild. So today you'll hear from investors about how their organizations are thinking about emergency savings and solutions some have already put into market. The agenda for today is that I'll introduce our panelists. I'll take a second to go over some housekeeping, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So first, let me introduce Jack Berry. He's the Vice President of Product Development Strategy and Transformation at John Hancock. John Hancock has a solution in market that Jack will be talking about today. Next, I'll introduce Zhivago Velasco. He's the Vice President of Product Innovation in the Workplace Business at MassMutual. He'll be joining us via audio only today, so you'll hear his voice. Zhivago, do you just want to say a quick hi so folks know your voice?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Excellent. Next, I'd like to introduce Kelly Rome. She's the Vice President of Product and Portfolio Management at Prudential. Prudential also has a solution in market. And then John Stever, Vice President of Customer Solutions Group at Voya. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us today. I want to go over a quick couple of housekeeping details before we get started. So if you're tweeting this during this webinar, please be sure to use hashtag COVID financial impact to join the conversation. Folks will be monitoring and retweeting and checking in on that conversation online. And also, if anyone uses that hashtag to offer you cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, that is fake. So please do not take up those offers. And then please submit your questions via the question feature in the GoToWebinar panel throughout the webinar. We will track them and do our best to bring them into the conversation during the Q&A or throughout the conversation. So the webinar will be recorded, and we will follow up with each of you with an email and a copy of that recording. So let's get started. Turning to the group, I wanted to start with a question for Jack and then hear from Zhivago and Kelly. Why did you decide to provide an emergency savings solution, and how did John Hancock think about offering that emergency savings solution?
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for hosting the event and inviting us to participate. It's great to see you again, and welcome to all the folks who have joined us across the country remotely here. So you hit on the sort of headline stat that the Boston Fed put out. We also at John Hancock, we produce a financial stress survey every year across our participant base, and have found similar data comes through. 2 out of 5 of our participants don't have access to $2,000 in savings for an emergency. 2/3 of them do not have 6 months of expenses set aside. And so our approach had been to first try to make lives better, and to make decisions easier, right? And so solving for the emergency savings gap that the numbers prove out was a priority for us. We knew it's a priority for our plan sponsors, and so we wanted to address it as quickly as possible and as across as many of our plans and participants as possible, and as efficient ways as we could. So we developed a FDIC insured brokerage account that sits outside the plan, where we help provide education and guidance of the need and the benefits of having a or an emergency savings account set up. And if you're able to do that on your own, that is great. You can check the box and move on. But if it's something you hadn't done, we allow you to click through and actually do fulfillment right through our site, establishing the account, and then, as I mentioned, set up an interest-bearing, no-fee FDIC insured account. We launched in January, so we were a few months ahead. As always, hindsight's 2020. It would have been great if we were a few years ahead. And as we sit here today, even through the COVID crisis and the current financial situation, we're approaching close to 1,000 participants over the course of the first half of this year have set up a goal and are on their way to funding their emergency savings account with us.
Great. Zhivago, similar question to you. How did MassMutual think about providing an emergency savings solution, and what were you thinking about, especially when you look at the thought of in-plan versus out-of-plan?
Sure. And, Nick, thank you for the opportunity to sort of talk about sort of emergency savings. This is something that I'm passionate about. And unfortunately, for the group here today, you won't be able to see sort of that passion. But the way we've approached at MassMutual sort of this particular issue was, we started about 5 years ago around building out our financial wellness program, and we realized through our proprietary consumer research that things were getting in the way of people saving for retirement, or having the adequate coverage for life insurance, right? And what we found is some of these short-term needs of our consumers were getting in the way of them doing the things that they need to do long-term. So our journey started with sort of providing a really holistic view of the individual's financial needs, and we launched our proprietary guidance tool called Map My Finances about 5 years ago to really help address some of those challenges around things beyond sort of retirement. But as we further evolve the solution, we wanted to address some of these short-term needs like emergency savings or challenges with people who have student loan debt or other debts, challenges with budgeting. So we've really over the last 2 years looked at building solutions out to help address those short-term needs. And the thinking is if we can help address some of those short-term needs, we can eventually get people to start focusing again on some of those longer-term needs around retirement or adequate coverage around life insurance, disability, healthcare, all the other things that we've been talking about as an industry. And one of the things that we recently launched, similar to Jack, we launched in January of this year, is an emergency savings solution, which is an out-of-plan solution, similar to Jack's product at Hancock. It's an FDIC-insured solution that we've partnered with a custodian, Millennium Trust, to provide sort of this guaranteed option for people outside of the plan. And the reason why we looked at sort of looking to outside the plan is a couple things, right? We wanted to provide a broader access to the solution via direct-to-consumer, but also as we're building out sort of our solution later this year, we'll have the ability for plan sponsors to provide a means for their employees to fund this emergency solution via payroll deduct. So we're trying to tackle this in a couple ways to make sure that we have broad coverage throughout our consumer base that we work with in our retirement business. And the other reason that we wanted to look at sort of an out-of-plan solution is the portability part, right? So as people switch jobs or may lose their job, especially around this time, they'll be able to sort of take this solution and continue to fund an emergency savings solution regardless of where they are, regardless of what employer they may be. So we see some benefits of both an in-plan and out-of-plan, but we've definitely chosen out-of-plan because we think we can sort of provide a more broader coverage, which we feel is sort of a challenge for us in the industry today around emergency savings.
Great, thanks, Zhivago. Same set of questions over to you, Kelly. As Prudential thought about providing emergency savings solution, how did you go about it? What were you thinking within the organization, and how did you think about in-plan versus out-of-plan as you approached the problem?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thank you to BlackRock and Commonwealth for hosting this. On behalf of Prudential, I want to make sure that all of the audience is safe and healthy, and friends and family are doing well. I know this is a difficult time, so I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. From a Prudential's perspective, this really came out of our broader financial wellness initiative, similar to some of my co-presenters today. We spent a lot of time looking at research, and there was some different research that we looked at that kind of led us down the emergency savings path. We looked at a lot of research relative to low to moderate income individuals, partnering with Prosperity Now to see how can we help those individuals start saving for retirement. We find a lot of times they don't even participate in the plan. So, how can we engage them and get them involved in saving? We also looked at a lot of research around loans in the plan. And what we found is a lot of times individuals were taking out a loan. They would make their loan repayments, but they would stop their contributions. So they were having a negative impact to their long-term retirement savings by taking that loan out. And we also saw that a lot of individuals actually defaulted on their loan when they left their employer. They're changing jobs every few years, and that's really putting a big financial stress on individuals and having an impact on their long-term ability to retire. So we kind of took a look at that. We looked at the ability to meet that short-term emergency needs that was coming out in the market, and decided to go with an in-plan after-tax solution. And the reason that we went with this was really around the simplicity of it. You know, it's easy for a plan to have an after-tax source available. Participants can enroll right in the plan through their employer. They're comfortable with their employer. We know that they like to buy products and services through their employer. It's payroll deduct, and it's easy to get access to through an EFT if they need to get that money out for an emergency. What we liked about this over the out-of-plan, and we do have an out-of-plan solution too within the Prudential enterprise, but it wasn't as easy as going to an ATM to get that money. It put a little bit of friction in the system, so individuals weren't, you know, going to grab money to go out to pizza and a movie. It needed to be a real emergency for them to take it out. So really, that's the premise around kind of what we did and why we did it.
That's great. And I'm going to go a little back in reverse order here, but Kelly, building on that, you know, as you were working on this, who were the key stakeholders within Prudential internally, as well as stakeholders externally? And were there any particular barriers you faced that you would advise those within the industry who are thinking about building these solutions, or employers looking to their record keepers to provide these solutions that you'd want to know?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we partnered with Prosperity Now on this initially to do some of the research and to think through some of the design pieces. We also spent a lot of time engaging our customers, our client advisory board, and talking to customers not on the advisory board to kind of get their perspective on what and how this would work, and would it be something that would be attractive to their employee base. And we also pulled in some of the advisors that help sell plans for us. So we kind of had a broad mix there, as well as we did some direct consumer testing to get a sense of, is this something that resonated or not? So we had a pretty broad constituent base there, as well as a lot of different areas within Prudential participated in it. From a barriers perspective, I think that the biggest barrier that we saw is we were kind of first to market with this type of concept, and it was new, and you know, people aren't always willing to jump in and try something that's new. So, you know, it was a little bit of a barrier to find a partner, find some plans to partner with us to try out the solution to see what happens. How do participants react? You know, do they join the plan? Do they save? Does the money stay in the plan? Things like that. But we were fortunate to we've got a little over 20 clients now that have actually added it. And we've been able to really partner with them and learn, you know, kind of what's working, what's not working. I think from a barrier perspective, the one thing right now that I would say is right now there is no regulatory relief that would enable a plan sponsor to, I'll say, default an individual into a money market or stable value type of account. The participant needs to elect that. So that's one thing that we would like to see change from a regulatory perspective, to give the plan sponsor some relief around that. So, you know, we're making sure that the individual is putting that money into an investment that will preserve the principle of it, and they won't lose it in the market.
Great, that's super helpful. Zhivago, similar question to you as you charted the course at MassMutual. The key stakeholders internally and externally, and were there any particular barriers that you faced, and what advice you'd give folks about those barriers you addressed?
Oh, sure. You know, internally, I think the biggest key stakeholders were really the organization itself, right? And really having the organization understand the value of financial wellness, and really addressing some of these short-term needs that these participants were facing. So just getting the organization comfortable with talking about things beyond retirement, which, you know, historically that's our bread and butter. But as we got our organization more and more comfortable with the broader sort of perspective around the consumer and financial needs, we're able to sort of get that excitement around launching solutions like an emergency savings, debt solution services, budgeting solutions, to really get our organization really geared up to talking more and more about financial wellness rather than just specifically about retirement. And it's similar to what we had to face externally as well, right? now you're seeing plan sponsors taking a look at, the importance of emergency savings. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to sort of do that. But just getting plan sponsors, advisors, and even the participants within these plans just aware of some of these solutions and resources that they have was a huge bear for us. But now we're seeing a huge upswing in just interest in some of these types of solutions, which we're thinking it's great. We're finally sort of getting the traction that we wanted to address some of these, again, short-term needs that are big barriers to some of the longer-term needs like retirement.
Great. Thanks, Zhivago. And Jack, similar questions over to you to build off what you mentioned earlier, the key stakeholders internally and externally at Hancock, and what particular barriers you face and what advice you'd have on addressing them.
Sure. So I'd pick up a lot of what Kelly and Zhivago shared. The key for us was making sure it wasn't just a feature or an offering that hung on the side of a record-keeping platform, that it was baked into the overall financial wellness program and the participant experience. So as we think about it, it is, what's the one next best step that a participant can take? So this may not be right for everyone, but it is right for a subset of the participant basis, and making sure that it's presented, again, through education and guidance at the right time for the right people. And then, if fulfillment's necessary, that we make the offer available. So that was really, internally the key. And then as I think about the external, it is, making sure, validating our assumption that it was something participants needed and plan sponsors would value. And, we did that through both formal client advisory boards and informal discussions with plan sponsors. And then the third piece was our distribution partners. There are some that are related or tied to banks who, this was a role that they wanted to help play and fulfill, and, making sure that we were set up for when a plan was advised by a distribution partner who wanted to play the role of helping fulfill the emergency savings, that we were flexible enough that we excluded our offering in those circumstances.
Great. That's helpful background. And I want to bring John now into the discussion, and I'd love to add your thoughts into what you've heard here, John. As you look across from where you sit in customer solutions with, record keeping and benefits and financial wellness broadly, how are you and Voya thinking about the emergency savings needs that consumers face?
Yeah, I think I could probably echo a lot of the comments that have been made already. So I'll try to come up with some things I think that would enhance how we're thinking about it. We really started thinking about emergency funds a long time ago, as we were starting to put together a broad financial wellness point of view at Voya. And we felt so strongly about the issue of saving for emergencies that it is its own pillar in our financial wellness strategy. Because we didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle of a broader savings conversation with people. We really wanted to make sure they understood the importance of having access to liquid funds in case of a financial shock. And I think one of the things that really helped frame our approach early in our process is a lot of our financial wellness work started with our own employees. And we went and we did a really robust survey to our own employees about their own financial wellness and what they thought about and what they cared about and what was important to them. And one of the things that we learned was when you ask people to take a financial wellness assessment and you make an objective assessment of what their biggest risks are, in our world, it's almost always emergency funds at the top of the list. When we look at objectively, what is the biggest gap that they have in their financial wellness, it's lack of emergency savings. But when we asked our own employees if they had to pick what was their biggest issue, emergency funds didn't even crack the top 5. I think it was number 8 or number 9 on the list. When you ask them, say, what is the one thing that's the most important for me to be wrestling with? And I think that really turned a light on for us, where we said, this is such an important product, but I think we do have to spend some time educating and raising awareness and helping people really understand the issue. And And rather than just jump directly into, we got to build a product that's going to solve this problem, I think we started to focus more of our energy early around education and guidance, making people aware of what these issues are, giving them advice and guidance around how to start to build savings and how to think about that from a budget perspective, while we start to look across our current solution set and as we think about developing future solutions. The reality is, as a record keeper, we've been in the emergency savings business for a long time. People have been using their retirement plans for hardship withdrawals and loans for financial shocks for decades. So we've been very tuned into that, and I think we're taking a very thoughtful approach about this issue in terms of not just what are the optimal solutions to be developing, but what experiences are we building around those solutions so that people will be willing to engage and change their behavior around their savings and how they're prioritizing different parts of their financial life. And the other thing I would add, Nick, and I know you know this from a lot of our conversations, when I first started digging into this, I was thinking of this in a very linear way. It's like people don't have savings, so we have to help them build up savings, and then they're going to have a shock, and then they build it back up. And the reality is, nobody's financial life is like that. This is more of a liquidity issue than it is necessarily a savings issue. A lot of people have very uneven income streams, and things that we would call a financial shock are really timing shocks for some people. So how do we think more holistically about helping people navigating some of those issues as opposed to treating this maybe solely as a savings problem? And how do we figure out how to help people save more?
That's great. And as you've been exploring it, how have you thought about in plan, out of plan, those sorts of dynamics, and what have you been thinking about there?
Yeah, I think because I sit in an enterprise function, I get to look across a lot of our lines of business and ways that we engage with customers. And I think that when we think about in plan versus out of plan, the analogy I use a lot is about a puzzle. We genuinely don't think like there's one answer to this. We think everybody's financial life is nuanced, and we deal with everyone on this call deals with a wide range of customers who have very different financial lives. And so I think if we think about what a longer term roadmap looks like for us, it's a combination of in plan and out of plan solutions that are going to enable people to pull together what they think is going to be the right patchwork of solutions that's going to help them navigate uncertainty in their particular financial situation. Very similar to Pru, like we enable after-tax contributions. There are people where after-tax makes perfect sense, and it's a great solution for them to use. If you think about like an employee benefits provider, we're not record keeping for a retirement plan. So if they want to try to help their customers with the issue of emergency savings, they have to have something that's out of plan. I think our job as Voya is to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers and our plan participants and figure out what are the kinds of things we can be doing to them that are going to help, and how do we bring them to the market in a way that's going to feel integrated and coordinated, and not unleash them into a marketplace and figure out what's best for you. I think we're definitely investing in guidance and education to help people understand what are their options and how to leverage and navigate those choices.
That's great. That's great. There's a question that just came in from the audience, and Kelly, I just wanted to give you a chance to tackle it. But the question was looking for clarification on is the Pru solution strictly an after-tax account, or is the Roth option in the DC plan available?
Right now, it's an after-tax solution. That doesn't mean that somebody couldn't use the Roth. We actually looked at both when we were doing our assessment, and felt that if you have an individual that within the first 5 years has a distribution that they need to take, that we felt that going the after-tax route might be the best solution, and it's something that can be used across the board regardless of income levels and contribution amounts. With the Roth, even with the in-plan version, you can be limited.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. So turning back to the solutions in market, Zhivago, I'll start with you. So what impact have you seen? And then I'll layer in a question that's also come in from the audience, which I'll ask everyone to sort of talk about. Do you think that any emergency savings solution, in plan or out of plan, should have a debit card attached to it? Which is sort of a philosophical question to build off of the, what kind of impact have you seen so far with the solution you've put in market at MassMutual?
Sure. You know, so the impact that we've seen, so we relaunched our guidance and sort of education tool, Map My Finances, last year, May of last year. So a little over a year ago. And, you know, as we launched that, you know, the top subjects were retirement and healthcare. But come this year and sort of during this pandemic, we've seen really a shift from retirement and healthcare to emergency savings, which was sort of the top subject that people were researching through our proprietary tool. So we have seen some changes in sort of the consumer behavior where they're, you know, because of this pandemic and a lot of uncertainty around sort of the economy these days, people are looking at emergency savings to see what they can do to help mitigate some of the, you know, some of the challenges that they may be facing in the future. We have seen sort of an uptick in withdrawals from, you know, the retirement plan, especially around sort of the CARES Act provision. And just like Jack mentioned, you know, if we were out in the market, you know, a year earlier than this year, I think we could have helped mitigate some of those challenges that people are facing today with helping them educate them about emergency savings and allowing them to take action through funding a solution. So Nick, what was the second question? I apologize.
Yeah, and I apologize for putting them together, but it was the philosophical question about a debit card from the audience. Should any of these solutions have a debit card attached to them?
Yeah, and philosophically, the way we've designed our program is similar to, you know, sort of the old sort of concepts around the cookie jar or the envelopes or, you know, the holiday or vacation club. We wanted to be able for people to sort of segregate sort of the emergency savings away from sort of their day-to-day expenses. And with that philosophy, what we've done is not include things like a debit card and, you know, created ways for them to save, but also easily withdraw, but not too easily where they can have the temptation to use it for their day-to-day expenses like lunch or dinner or you know, some other expenses that that may get in the way of sort of the real goal of these emergency savings. So we've consciously not included a debit card, but in what we wanted to do was, in case there is an emergency and a need for these funds, there is an easy way to withdraw these funds within a day or two to make sure that they can cover some of those unexpected emergencies.
That's great. Jack, similar question to you. What impact have you seen so far? And the philosophical question about, you know, is the debit card on the roadmap? Was it contemplated? Uh-oh, we lost your audio, Jack.
Maybe the best way to demonstrate impact is if you're to look at participant page views over the first 6 months of the year, the top hits have been related to CARES Act information, and the second most popular are either education on emergency savings or fulfillment of emergency savings. And I think those two things go hand in hand, and John said it really well. It's not necessarily a savings situation, it's a liquidity situation. You know, historically, unfortunately, people have saved only in the retirement plan. So when you needed liquidity, you know, that's why things like CARES Act or, you know, previous national disasters have you know, provided access to to retirement plan funds as a way to solve for short-term or immediate-term emergencies. Hopefully, longer term, that isn't the case as more people do, set up emergency savings plans. Again, either in plan or out of plan. I think that's interesting to talk about on calls like this, but the impact is, as long as people are checking the box and doing it one way or the other, that's the real big win. For us, we're similar to Chicago. We want to make sure people have access to their money when they need it, not necessarily when they always want it. And so, I don't think it is appropriate to have a debit card tied to it. We have a really easy online way to for people to request their money be sent to them. It's there. It's for them to use. There's no fees attached. But it probably isn't something you want people walking around with in their wallet. Just avoid any of that temptation. And it's one whether it's theoretical or it proves itself out, time will tell. But having it set up through your record keeper or aligned with your retirement record keeper, it does sort of create in one's mind the idea that it's different than spending money. And so again, that goes whether it's in plan or out of plan, having it separate from your day-to-day, what's in your wallet and what you're carrying around with, hopefully helps people learn or think of that pool of money differently. So.
And Kelly, same question to you in terms of what impact Prudential's seen, and then this fun philosophical question about debit cards and are thinking about them on your roadmap, or if you thought about them in terms of in-plan solution.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is very similar to what the others have said. There's definitely a lot more interest now in emergency savings, and there's a lot more awareness. I think 6 months ago when we were talking to people about emergency savings, it's like, yeah, that's something that advisors talk about, and they tell you that you should have, but everybody doesn't have it. Nobody has it. You could talk to low to moderate income individuals. You could talk to some high net worth individuals. And what was surprising is that across that spectrum, a lot of people didn't have emergency savings, and they're feeling that the crunch now. If they're out of job, have reduced work hours, or had to take a pay cut. So that conversation has really changed pretty dramatically over the past 6 months or so. What's interesting is, as we look at kind of the solution that we have, and that the plans that have adopted it, is we're actually seeing an impact on the people that are first entering the plan for the first time. We have seen an uptick in individuals who are not participating in the plan start joining, as it's kind of like a gateway into retirement savings. If I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to afford to save for retirement, maybe I can do this, put it in there, and knowing that if I have to get at it, I can get at my money. So that was one thing that was pretty interesting to us as we kind of looked at what we were seeing. When we looked at COVID and we looked at distributions, I mean, I think it's probably industry-wide. You're going to find most people that are taking distributions will take a COVID distribution, and they're going to take out a larger amount than they would have in their emergency savings at this time, just because our product is, although it's been in the market for a while, it's still relatively new, and people are building up their account balances. So it's interesting to watch, and I think this situation that we're all living through right now is really going to change the way individuals think about their money. They will be much more aware about having that emergency cushion there to help them through events like this. So I'm really optimistic that going forward that we will all see a big uptick in adoption of this. In regards to your question on the debit card, we have had conversations about it. I think there's pros and cons to it. You can argue, both sides of the coin on it. For right now, it's not something that we're pursuing because the product is still new, and we're trying to understand how people will use it. And we did have conversations around, if you make it too liquid, is it going to get used for the wrong thing?
Great, that's super helpful. And John, I'm going to turn to you in a second. I want to pop up our midway poll real quick for the audience out there, and wanted to see, do you think that your employees or employers that you work with their employees would be better off now if they had access to an emergency savings solution before COVID? Yes, no, or not sure. We'll take a minute for folks to complete that poll, and then we'll turn to you, John, to talk about how you're thinking about e-savings now in sort of a COVID-19 pandemic world these days. So seems to be unanimity that folks would be better off. So John, how has COVID-19 evolved the conversation or impacted the conversation around emergency savings for you and Voya?
Yeah, I would, if I speak a little bit more generally, I think I really do just believe it's an accelerant. So I think those of us who've been watching the data and have been waiting for something like this, some kind of event or something that's going to happen that's going to really shine a bright light on this problem. Up until now, you see the data and you're like, wow, that's really scary, but it doesn't feel. You don't feel it on a day-to-day basis. Now you turn on the news and you can see like the real impact that this lack of savings is having on so many Americans. So I think it's raising awareness among customers. It's raising awareness among employers. I think it's going to be a good catalyst and support for companies like us to take more action and really make more investments in what we can do to help serve. Because the reality, speaking for Voya, we're very passionate about helping people prepare for retirement and really getting ready for that chapter in their life where they're not working anymore. Now this is the time where they've been building for all this time, and we know that insecurity in your financial life today makes it much harder to be ready down the road. And so we're locked around trying to help people today and have the wherewithal and the ability to save for those longer term goals. But it's hard to do that when you're trying to figure out how to pay your rent. So I do think this is going to be an accelerant to those conversations. I think talking some of the comments the other panelists have made about interest and awareness on the emergency savings topic, I would say I would go even a little bit further, and I would say we're going to see a lot of difference in intent, where consumers are not just seeing, oh yeah, now I get it. They're intending to behave differently. They are intending to spend differently. They're intending to put money away for a loss of wages in particular. So all in all, you hate to say anything good about what we've been dealing with from an economic fallout perspective, but it is definitely shining a light on a really important issue that we all have seen coming. I think it's now gives us the air cover to really do something about it.
And I'll open it up to the whole group, but I think that, John, what that reminds me of is the conversation I hear throughout the industry of where should folks put the next dollar? What's the right? And I know I've talked to Jack, you a bit about this, the sort of magical, where does the next perfect dollar go? Is this a moment? Is this a real opportunity for the retirement industry to start leading with short-term solutions to drive long-term stability? I wonder, Jack, your thoughts on that, and maybe others in the group.
I think it's personal and holistic are probably the two ways to think about it. And so you may not lead every conversation with it, but knowing what either a participant or a group of participants' current situation is, it allows you to have the right conversation rather than always leading or only talking about get in the plan, save more in the plan, save more later in the plan. It's the realization that many participants are all at different life stages, and if you only talk about saving for something that's 30 or 40 years in the future, you're probably going to lose a good chunk of the audience. So being able to understand where each person is in his or her life, and then being able to have a more specific conversation about what's important to them, whether that is current lack of preparedness for an emergency or student loans, which some folks have touched on, or is it you have those solved for, and it is what keeps you up at night, or where you have your focus, it is on what's 20 years from now going to look like, and being able to have that conversation.
How about the rest of the group? Joaquin, I can't see you to call on you directly, but is this a moment, during the COVID pandemic to shift a little bit of outreach and thinking and targeting around short-term stability and short-term needs to drive longer-term thinking in the future?
And Nick, yeah, it's definitely an opportunity, and we've really thought about sort of the short-term and long-term sort of dynamic even before the pandemic. But we think the importance of providing, just like Jack said, sort of a more holistic sort of view of the financial needs of the customer is going to be important from a long-term perspective for this industry, right? If you just focus on just the conversation around retirement, it may not mean a lot of things to some people who are struggling these days with, as John was saying, sort of paying rent or just putting food on the table. If we can help address some of those short-term needs, then they'll be more than likely to listen to sort of that messaging around retirement if we can help them solve these short-term needs. So I think it's going to be very important that, from a record-keeping standpoint, that we address sort of all the needs across the board. So eventually we can get people more and more prepared, not just for retirement, but for all their financial needs across their entire life cycle.
Kelly, I wonder your thoughts. You mentioned earlier that you're seeing a little bit of this engaging with the AfterTax in plan for emergencies, and then getting more engaged in the whole plan. So how do you see this playing out? And is this an opportunity to really go bigger in that messaging?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that it is. It gets into the whole broader financial wellness conversation that we've been talking about. I mean, coming out of this, we'll probably see a lot of people that are going to need a lot of support around debt management because they're taking on a lot of debt that they hadn't planned for because they didn't have this emergency savings. So there's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of education and guidance around how do you get out of the debt situation that you're in today, and how do you build up that emergency savings account so that you don't put yourself in the same situation when it happens again, because it will happen again. Maybe not, it may not be COVID, it may be something else, but there's always some bump in the road. It's part of life, and how can you help people get prepared for that? And I agree, it's much broader than just the retirement story. It's really that broader financial wellness, and how do you help people along that path, regardless of where they're starting, help them get to a successful ending.
Yeah. Hey, can I just to piggyback on that? I agree with everything you said. I think the one thing I used to talk a lot about when we were talking about financial wellness at Voya was that the math of financial wellness isn't super complicated. The emotional components of financial wellness are incredibly complicated, like how people feel about their finances, how they make decisions, behaviors that they exhibit. Like a lot of that has to do with the outcomes that they ultimately end up with. And I think what's happening recently with the economic, the fallout of COVID, is that people are way more tuned into risks now that I don't think maybe they didn't take as seriously as they might have, or didn't see that like maybe the likelihood of it happening as dramatically as it has now. And I think you're right, Kelly. I think it's going to happen again. This is not like a once in a generation event. I don't think. I think we have to live in a reality that things like this could happen in the future. And I think it's going to change not just the conversation we're having with customers, but their receptivity to a broader range. Because at the end of the day, what we want people to do is want people to feel secure about their financial world and feel prepared and have confidence in the work that they're doing, the savings they're making, the planning they're doing, so that they can weather storms like this. And I think this it's an unfortunate backdrop, but it is an important backdrop that I think is going to change the conversation for all of us.
That's well said, John. And so I wonder, bridging that gap at the moment and this potential opportunity that you all have identified and are addressing, how do you bring plan sponsors, employers along to see the value in making this part of either the record keeping or John at Voya, the benefits they offer and so forth? How do you engage in those conversations to move those forward? I guess maybe I'll start with Jack on that one.
So We do. I mentioned earlier our financial stress survey, and I think we're approaching 10 years of doing it across our participant base. So it gives us really rich data that we can share with plan sponsors, and it's also self-reported, so it is exactly what their employees are telling us. And there's two interesting points that I pulled up from last year's, and it was 50% of employee survey worried about personal finances at least once a week at work. And 40% told us that they spend at least 3 hours per month working on personal finances at work. So,
Wow.
if you're an employer, that is real tangible dollars or productivity that is missing because your employees are stressed because they have these problems. And then secondly, there's sort of the employee engagement benefit side of things that if you're an employee at a company and you're not ready or prepared to make the leap into joining the retirement plan, what is a very expensive benefit for an employer to offer gets lost on them. So having something tied to that retirement plan in the form of an emergency savings account allows the employer to connect with all members of the staff, whether they're ready to save for retirement or not. And those 2 points, sort of the head and the heart approach, has really worked well for us on the employer side, because it is, you always run the risk of the employer saying, yeah, emergency savings is a problem, but like that's not what we're here to do. So helping them understand that employees show up with their lives and sit at their desk, and it can weigh on them, and that then has impacts onto the company, has worked really well for us.
Kelly, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, similar to what Jack had shared. We actually have some assessments, within our participant site that the employees can go through and take. And what we're starting to find is more employers are actually willing to incent their employees to go through and do those assessments and get the results to really get specific information on their employee base so that they can think about how they design their benefit programs. Knowing that they've got a lot of generations out there, a lot of social economic situations that'll vary. So we're seeing a lot more of the sponsors' interest in really getting that specific information about their employees. And I think the value that they're seeing from record keepers like Prudential is that the employee can go and provide that information, but it's not going directly to the employer. So they're a little bit more forthright than a survey that may be done directly by their employer.
Great. Zhivago or John, anything to add?
Yeah, this is Zhivago. I think from a standpoint of the plan sponsor, the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in interest from plan sponsors around providing a solution to their employees, right? And what we're sort of looking at is helping sort of employers with a payroll deduct option later on this year. So, so they can provide even broader access to their employees. But more importantly, what we've seen at the participant level, where people who are using Map My Finances, which is sort of that guidance and education tool, where emergency savings is the #1 subject that people are researching, is going to help with the story for plan sponsors around why it's going to be important for them to offer a solution or access to a solution like this, regardless if it's in plan or out of plan. And sort of that data speaks for itself, right? If employees and participants are looking for this information, I think that's going to sort of put some credence around why plan sponsors should be providing access to a solution like this.
Yeah, and Nick, if I could just to add on to that, I think we spent a lot of time trying to think through like what makes a good solution for a customer. What are the characteristics of a good emergency, or the liquidity, low fees, easy access, things like that. I would say we're spending more time now thinking about how do we make this easy for sponsors too and employers, because at the end of the day, we can develop all the solutions in the world, but if we make it hard for the employers to stand them up and support them, they're not going to do it, because they're dealing with the same thing consumers are a lot of times. They're just trying to figure out how to keep keep their doors open, their lights on, and really basic blocking and tackling of the business. So I do think as an industry, we need to be paying very close attention to not just developing solutions we think are going to make a difference, but how do we make it easier for our plan sponsors and employers to support and enable them.
That's great. That's great. And so we've come to the end of our time. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we could go for another hour, even just delving into lots of the questions and ideas that have come in through the Q&A. But first, I wanted to say thank you to our panelists, Jack from John Hancock, Zhivago from MassMutual, Kelly from Prudential, John from Voya. We really appreciate the opportunity to discuss these topics with you, to hear your important insights, and to really engage in how the record keeper space can address this emergency savings challenge. I think two of the big takeaways from this conversation are obviously the opportunity that all record keepers have to engage on providing employees with a solution to meet these financial goals around liquidity and short-term needs. And then also how employers can start to engage in conversations with record keepers like yourselves to explore financial wellness offerings that include product solutions in plan and out of plan to address this challenge. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our audience members for joining. We hope you found the conversation insightful and helpful. And once again, if you could quietly behind you're all on mute, but just a round of applause for Jack, Kelly, Zhivago, and John. Just a super great conversation. I'm Nick Maynard from Commonwealth. This webinar was presented in partnership with BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to savingsproject.org. That's savingsproject.org. And you can also visit buildcommonwealth.org to learn more about our organization and view the upcoming webinars that Commonwealth has on tap, including the next one on August 13th in this series. And we'll be sharing the recording and recap of this webinar tomorrow. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Take care.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.